So hello, everyone. I'm Professor Lenni Benson, and I'm going to guess that many of you already know me. I have been teaching at New York Law School since 1994, and back in around 2006, I started doing a lot of volunteer work and training lawyers to represent unaccompanied youth in the city of New York. By 2012, 2013, was running a small project at the school that became the wonderful nonprofit we are talking about here today called the Safe Passage Project. And it is my joy to introduce our new executive director, Angela Fernández. And so let me tell you a little bit about Angela, and then I'm going to ask her to add to whatever I left out of the introduction, because when you have a professional career as rich and complex as Angela, I'm only going to be able to touch on some highlights. So Angela graduated from a wonderful law school here in New York, Columbia University's law school. And as we were saying just a few minutes ago, she did a lot of different careers in public interest law, everything from criminal justice aspects to health or housing or community building. But eventually she landed in northern Manhattan in a coalition working on immigrant empowerment, very much a grassroots community-based organization where she had to help build the legal services team, but more than just legal services, essential legal services provided to an immigrant community, empowering and educating the immigrant community themselves to be their own best advocates, to work for change, to work for goals of family reunification and fairness in society. And that's how we first met, was when I moved to New York in 1994. She was one of the community leaders. Angela's own family heritage, coming from Spanish and Dominican immigrants, may have eventually led her to this work, but you could have that background and not have been as fully engaged as she has been. And of course, we should know as well that New York City is such a diverse community that when you do immigrant rights, you're working one day with people from West Africa and another day from people from the displaced regions and wars of the Middle East. And while Spanish-speaking migrants may have been her main focus for many years, and is certainly she's proud of, she's a generalist in our field of immigration as well. After she did that work, she joined the New York State Division of Human Rights. And if you're not familiar with that agency, she was the commissioner. That is such an essential bastion, a really active bureau that helps people fight for their human dignity and can receive damage awards. And under her leadership, her team was much more effective than they had been in prior years, really representing New Yorkers in their claims and vindication for human rights abuses. She also has been someone who's been in other kinds of contexts. So we see her as a leader in a community-based organization, a leader within state government, but also sometimes in organizations where your diplomacy is your biggest skill. And when she worked on the Civilian Police Complaint Review Commission, which I may have that mastered the name, she was one of the people who identified a systemic problem in the way that the record of abuse in police officers was not transparent, and she helped lead for reform in that area. So when you put all of that together, Angela is lawyer, Angela has community organizer, Angela is working with diverse communities, Angela as being a partner in championing education, self-empowerment, protection of human rights. Wow, are we lucky when you applied for the position of executive director. So many of you may know that Safe Passage Project had a wonderful interim director, our own Desiree Hernandez Sanchez, who's also in charge of our legal department and is continuing on as our deputy. But Desiree was very clear with the board that she loves the work she does as a lawyer, and that she was hoping the board would recruit a new executive director, who, of course, as executive director, you have to have such a broad range of skills, and you can't focus just every day on the children and the legal work. So, Angela, I've given you an introduction. I told you why the board was thrilled, but I have one more thing to say about you. And that was, we tried to have a very transparent, engaged recruitment process, not only with our board members, but with our staff. And it was absolutely clear that our staff were enchanted, thrilled, inspired by you. And that is an exciting part too, to know that this organization is a community of like-minded people, our supporters, our funders, our staff, our board, and we all welcome you. So what did I leave out in that introduction?
No, I mean, that was it. You covered everything. And I'm, I'm extremely humbled. And especially I have to say that I have been able to see what Lenni has done in creating the Safe Passage Project, which has just been incredible because it is truly a model for the entire country. So it was an honor for me to be interviewed and then to be hired. And I'm very excited to be working in partnership with you and of course with the entire staff and the board in continuing to strengthen and build on the mission of Safe Passage Project. One of the things that I think is really important for me is when we think about the communities that we are working with, and that side-by-side piece of it is very important. It's not so much, of course, we're providing services, but there's so much value that comes from the clients that we represent. That I like to say something, it's a quote that's been said before, but that innovation happens at the margins. And so when we look at the communities that we are serving, we have to also look and see that those innovations are right there. And when I think of the work of, and I've been here for 2 months, and I've been able to really see the tremendous work that the lawyers do and that the social workers do. And it is nothing but incredibly powerful. And so for someone like me that comes from either building organizations or turning, agencies around, to walk into an organization that just is in such a strong position, and then to see the innovation that comes out from each of the staff members, and how do we better serve the people, that the kids that we're serving, how do we better represent our kids? And it's deeply rooted in a human-centered and trauma-informed lawyering. And we have this support of the social workers that can address components that don't necessarily fall to an immigration lawyer. For example, any housing needs, health needs. I mean, our kids are coming with such a large array of complex issues. And on top of that, many of them are teenagers. And we all remember what it was like to be a teenager. So imagine being a teenager and then being in a country where you don't speak the language and where you are trying to navigate just regular day-to-day on top of the legal piece. And, one thing I just want to add to close out on this particular piece, we are very lucky in that we've been in existence as a nonprofit for 10 years. The work itself has been a little bit longer under Lenni through the law school. And we are now meeting and speaking with the kids that we served 10 years ago.
Right.
And now what they're saying, what they're telling us is that the lawyer from Safe Passage Project was absolutely the only person that knew of their status. And that gave them a tremendous sense of calm. Yes. And when we think about the emotional health and the mental health of the kids that we're representing, just having a trustworthy lawyer, that contributes to that. Mm-hmm. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say that, while our main mission is definitely the service of the unaccompanied youth, the migrant youth, and the age ranges, the median age crossing the border sometimes is as low as 13, 14, 15. But of course, we also meet young people who are getting closer to 21, and we start with their cases. We don't turn young people away because they're in their 20s as well, some of the things we can do. But I think another constituency that we serve that we don't always mention is we are also serving the larger legal community. So maybe this is the law professor in me, Angela, but we've already talked about this. I'm so proud of Alex Rizzio, who's brought this webinar together, and Desiree and all the team of lawyers and the social workers who are continuously educating our pro bono partners. And those pro bono partners include major corporations, banks, law firms, but also lots of individual lawyers. And so we are a capacity builder, very similar to what you did in the coalition up in Northern Manhattan. One lawyer can serve a lot of people, but one lawyer teaching other lawyers or teaching community members how to navigate this complex system builds a community of resourceful, resilient, rebounding people. And so I'm very proud of that mission too. And I know you've only been here 2 months, but you know, and I know from our last board meeting that there's over 500 cooperating pro bono lawyers actively right now. All right, so let's talk a little bit, if we could, about what's going on in current events. Is that all right? Can we turn to that? And then as we're talking about the pressures Safe Passage is facing, that we're all facing in the field, our community is facing, maybe you could also go a little bit deeper into the resources you have within the organization to meet those challenges. So to our audience, I'm sure you've been following the news here in New York about the recent intense arrival of many family units, some unaccompanied children, some cobbled together groups of young people who are making the migrant journey from Venezuela, from Ecuador, from Nicaragua. Those are 3 countries that, yes, they have always come to New York, but not in the numbers that arrived in the last few weeks. So the city estimates that more than 21,000 people arrived from about the middle of July to the beginning of October, middle of October. Numbers do seem to be dropping a little bit, and we'll talk about why that is. But those people are all in removal proceedings in our New York area. And our court was already the largest in the country. In fact, the court was so large, for some strategic reason, the immigration court is divided now into 3 separate entities, one at Varick Street, one at 26 Fed, where we've always done the majority of our work, and now one across the street at 290 Broadway. There are close to 60 immigration judges just in our New York area. In addition, we have 2 asylum offices in our region. The Newark Asylum Office, which, even though it's named Newark, now has an office at Varick Street, and the New York Asylum Office, which is all the way out in the tip of Long Island, or the middle of Long Island. Our community Safe Passage project has always been focused on serving unaccompanied minors in the immigration process, the majority of whom are in immigration court proceedings, because, as I'm sure the audience knows, we don't have a mechanism of taking children and monitoring their immigration process in a benevolent, positive way. Instead, we throw them into the cauldron of immigration court alone. And there's no appointed counsel, there's no special procedures. We used to have very focused, trained judges for a few years that we try to have a child-friendly courtroom. We're working with the court actively right now to try to understand how they're managing the juvenile dockets. And we were told there are 6 dockets now happening every week. So 6 dockets of 30 children happening every week, sometimes as many as 50 children. That's a lot of new cases. Those are primarily new cases coming in. In addition, I just want to share my screen for one moment, if I could. Alex put together this data for me. Whoops, host has disabled screen sharing.
Oops,
so
sorry,
I don't know,
hold
Alex,
on one second. I'm gonna fix that.
Okay. I just, because it's numbers, when you hear numbers orally, sometimes I don't think they have the same impact as when you see this. I'm still on disabled. I don't know, Alex, if you want to share.
I just
I'm
made
the
you
now.
host.
Okay, here we go.
So that should do it.
All right, and I'm looking for the PowerPoint. Just 1 minute. It always takes me more time, even though I thought I had it all set up here. There it is. Okay, and just from this slide right now, just want to make this big for you. So this is a snapshot of people apprehended really just at the southwest border. And if you look at these numbers, and we're looking at the one circled 2022, the total for the fiscal year of 2022, which just ended in September, 152,000 unaccompanied youth. And the prior year, 146. But then you see a very low number in 2020, and that is directly a result of the pandemic. And some of those lower numbers in 2019 also in the later months. The way the fiscal year runs, 2019 is actually running through most of 2020. So when you look at those numbers, let's say just take the last 2 years, 300,000 unaccompanied children arriving at our southwest border. And we know that New York tends to receive between 12 and 20% of those young people. add the chaos of this summer, where the governors in some of the Southwest border states and some well-meaning cities were busing people to New York under false premise that if you come to New York, you get a job, you get housing, you get a free lawyer. We are in an unprecedented challenge. So, Angela, now that I put those 300,000 children on your doorstep, well, let's just cut it down to 60,000 of them. What can Safe Passage Project do to meet the need?
Well, we continue to meet the need that is there. We have approximately 30 attorneys. We have, as you mentioned, our 500 pro bono attorneys that consistently, they tell us and they tell others that it is one of the best pro bono experiences that they have within the legal profession because they are matched up with a mentor attorney. And so we ensure our organization, when we have a pro bono attorney from, let's say, a law firm, take on a case of representing a young person, they are not going at it alone. They will have a mentor attorney from our staff mentoring them. So that actually allows us to represent more children. But this reality of what's happening at the border, and we have to think about this also from a global perspective. There are all those, there are the push-pull factors as to why immigrants are coming here and why children are coming here. And what we have recognized and identified is that there aren't enough lawyers within the immigration space, I mean, across the country for the need. But what we have are amazing things in place. We have strong partnerships with, for example, the IJC, the Immigrant Justice Corps, that we get 2 fellows from them every single year. And many of them continue to stay with us, which means that we are developing and broadening that immigration bar. There are attorneys that are actually leaving the government space that are interested in working in nonprofit. So my goal is to make sure that our organization is the go-to organization that lawyers want to come and work at because they feel that they can do their work, that they have agency, that they're growing professionally. And that is what is going to help us to meet this need. And for us, additionally, the way that we define success, in addition to, we want to increase the number of lawyers that we have, we want to also increase the social workers so that they are receiving that holistic, the kids are receiving that holistic service. But what does success look like for the kids that we're representing? Right. These cases can take up to 5 years. So yes. In that process, while they stabilize their status, get a green card, hopefully then become US citizens, yes. Then are they contributing to their communities? Are they participating?
And I know you all are engaged in studying that right now, working with exactly. Some sociologists and also with the social work team. Do you have any preliminary results of some of the histories of the children we've represented in the past?
No, the preliminary results are that the having Safe Passage Project in their corner was a stabilizing factor right. In their lives, which then led to success for them as adults. Yes. And so that is a unique aspect of our legal services organization.
I mean, it just makes common sense, doesn't it? Like if you're a young person trying to live and sadly, many of the young people have told us over the years, they're just told by maybe well-meaning adults, don't show up at immigration court, just live underground. Going down that path can ruin a life, just keep you trapped. Sometimes it's through no fault of their own, but the options are few and far between if you ignore the need for legal services as a child. Happily, our Congress is more generous with some of the remedies, asylum or special immigrant juvenile status or other things that we can do as a legal organization if we meet the young person at the right moment. And if we can help, as we said, find a lawyer, get you a good social work team, encourage you to stay in school if that's appropriate, for you to go on with higher education, you're more economically stable, you have more autonomy, you're not always looking over your shoulder. The diminishment of the trauma and the stress is significant. Now, I'm going to move you a little bit, Angela, from the children that we're representing to the well-being of the organization. Again, you've only been here 2 months, but we know that there's been the great resignation across a lot of the country. And I know a few of our attorneys have, after the pandemic, moved on, one to stay home with growing children and one to take a job in a remote part of the country, et cetera. But how are our staff managing, and how is it that you, as the leader with the other managers in the organization, are supporting our team?
So one thing I do want to uplift, and it predates me, but Safe Passage Project during the pandemic was one of the few organizations that did not have to lay off anyone, which goes to show you the economic health of the organization. So I think, we have to really highlight that, because then as we come out of the pandemic, Safe Passage Project, from a staff perspective, is more stable than other nonprofits that have come out of the pandemic with maybe, a much reduced force. So what I have been doing is meeting with different groups of staff in the organization to hear from them what they think we should be doing to strengthen our organization. I have already met with the paralegals as a group. This is an incredibly talented group of employees who almost all of them have been with the organization an average of 4 or 5 years, and work very intimately with the lawyers, with the clients, with the pro bono attorneys. And some tremendous observations have come out of those meetings. Of course, I'm working very closely with the leadership team, and I see my role as ED in removing barriers. Is there something that the organization has been doing that maybe it's something that that made sense in the beginning, but should be done slightly differently now that we have a larger team, as an example? And so, so that I see my role right now is to continuing to understand how everything functions, and then identify where we could be doing things a little bit differently, so that we are both serving our children well, but where our staff feel like they are working in a place that is the only place they want to work in. Because it is the place where they can grow professionally and also become self-realized.
And I do compliment you for it, and also the leadership team. I do want to say, sometimes being not day to day in the work anymore, I'm still always around and trying to be a resource in various ways for the organization. It's counterintuitive at first that remote services using Zoom or text or phone calls was able to serve the needs of this organization. But it was almost, to the young people, it was a benefit. And that may seem so counterintuitive to some of us older generation. Like, you would think you'd want to be in the same room next to the social worker, the lawyer, but young people love text, boy, and they love not having to do that commute into New York City, which is challenging and expensive for them. And so I do want to compliment everyone in Safe Passage who, despite the pandemic and closure of courts and chaos in the docketing and the legal issues, there was a steady drumbeat of, we're here with you, we're working with you, keeping people informed and keeping people engaged, so that we didn't see a huge attrition of our youth clients disappearing or staff leaving the organization. I know you did want to give a shout out to the fact that we are now a unionized organization, and I know the final agreement is not signed, but we just want to be sure our funders and donors know that that's been really an opportunity for assessment and growth about where our organization stands, and are we a great workplace. So I don't know if you wanted to comment on that.
Sure. No, it's the staff organized a union about 2 years ago, and then when I came in, my priority was to get the contract signed. The negotiations had been ongoing, and I'm very excited that we are going to be signing a contract. I believe in, I don't want to jinx it, but I'll just say definitely before the end of the year. And that's, I see this as an opportunity to have a formal process to hear from the staff what their needs are, and the we see this as a movement that's been happening not only in nonprofits, but also across, in the private sector as well. But I think that that walking into an organization that's in the middle of union negotiations, I saw as an opportunity to build trust, even though it sounds counterintuitive, but it is an opportunity to build trust, and that's what we've been doing.
So here we are in this fairly healthy financial situation in that we didn't lose money during the pandemic. We didn't have to lay people off. We are hiring. There are open positions. In fact, if anyone's listening and knows of great attorneys, particularly I think in our Long Island office, right? We're
Staff
still
attorneys for
we
Long
wanna-
Island and
we
even
wanna
and for New
grow
York
them.
as well.
Yes. And obviously one of the things we love about our supporters is that we want to hear from you and have engagement with you. But let's just turn back to some of the contemporary legal issues again. Recently, Alex shared with us at the board meeting and with me in another meeting that the chaos created by the 20,000 people arriving so suddenly and immigration, Customs and Enforcement, ICE, asking everyone to come in for what they call a check-in to 26 Federal has created unprecedented lines wrapping around the building in the morning. And the security guards and everyone has to go through the same door to get up to court or to go to the Social Security office or to get for an ICE check-in. Now, one of our clients told us about his cousin who missed his hearing and got an order of removal in absentia, which is possible under the rules of the court, because the security guards wouldn't let him go into the building and help that young person, find the courtroom. So we know that there's tremendous challenges, and I'm happy about a development. I was saying at the beginning of this, when we were just chatting, yesterday, a federal district court struck down the use of quarantine law as a substitute for immigration process. Now, children have sometimes been pushed back due to the COVID restrictions, but after some litigation, a federal court ruled that you could not refuse children at the border. But now with this dismantling of an inappropriate use of the health protection law, just again, only at the Southwest border, as a mechanism of rapid repulsing people away, we know that the youth we represent are going to be mixed back into the vast pool of adults that are also in the removal system. So given the current legal challenges and given that our audience of supporters are here, where are you and the team hoping to grow to meet the growing need? Like, why do we need support today?
Well, we need support because it is clear. The statistics are clear. If a child faces an immigration judge by themselves, their being deported increases by 80%. When they are represented, their deportation rate goes down to 0%. Our rate of preventing deportations is 100%, which means that children have different kinds of rights to stay in the United States. And when they do not have an attorney to represent them, they are not able to exercise that right. And because in immigration, you don't have a right to a free attorney because it's considered a civil matter, yet the punishment can be death for some of these kids. It is absolutely critically important that we have the resources to be able to not only hire attorneys, but train attorneys, bring attorneys from other legal fields. Immigration law is considered as complex as tax law. And that sometimes is the barrier for an attorney that wants to switch gears from criminal law, for example. But those are people that with the appropriate training with us can help expand our base of attorneys.
Yeah, and we do work in coalition with others. I just was checking out some of the Q&A questions on HILA, so I'm going to segue some of those in. Are we the only ones doing this work? No, there is a coalition here in New York we call iCare, which is the Child Advocates resource. So there's about 4 or 5 of us that focus on children. But your point just a minute ago that we need many, many more people to join in the efforts. So if people haven't been to the Safe Passage Project website in a while, they may want to go to safepassageproject.org and look at the resources that the team builds. And that is the tip of the iceberg. Those are the public-facing manuals on how to navigate court, how to navigate asylum, what is special immigrant juvenile status. But once people are working with us and being mentored with us, the team has developed a really robust platform of sharing documents, reviewing materials, keeping track and best practices. So I want people listening to us to understand that we're more than just a legal services organization. We are also a data gathering machine. We are an advocacy organization. And Angela, you have that experience in working in national and state issues. There was a question, do we also serve the DACA community? Those are the childhood arrivals that have been through the ringer with litigation over whether or not President Obama had the authority to create the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, and Congress being stuck, not being able to pass legislation. Did you want to comment at all about our engagement there?
No, absolutely. So as an organization, we will look for every form of relief for that child. And for some of the kids that come to our organization, DACA is the only form of relief. And yes, we have helped many, not only many of clients receive DACA, but also some of our staff. We have, and that's one of the things that I'm very proud about our organization, is that we have directly impacted people working on our staff, and some of them are DACA recipients.
And just to say that, I'm cautiously, very cautiously optimistic. This is a lame duck Congress right now. And sometimes some of the best immigration laws have snuck out of Congress in these couple of months. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of need on the plate right now. There is a bill, for example, that we have been very actively engaged in. I want to give a shout out to Alex Rizzio again, because she's really been one of the heavy lifters on this work. And that is to repeal the quota limitation on children who could receive special immigrant juvenile status. We can navigate getting young people all the qualifying steps to qualify for this special immigrant benefit. But Congress has capped the total number of visas each year, creating a very long queue. And that's why when you say a case can last 5 years, one of the reasons is this artificial limit on the number of children who qualify for the protection, but we just meter out when they can finally complete their case. So there's a bill pending in Congress right now to repeal that cap, and Safe Passage has been part of that. So it is something that I wouldn't say it's our everyday activity of being involved in advocacy or legislative efforts, but it is something we also do. Did you want to comment on maybe some of the things that we're doing in that area at all, either with state government or federal government?
Sure. So, I mean, at the federal level, I mean, it is critically important. If we can remove that that kind of artificial barrier, as you call it, because it is, it would allow so many young people to then be able to continue moving forward and apply for their green card, which is truly like, that is the document that you need to feel stability and continuity in the United States. There have been some proposals at the state level, but it looks like it's not going to move forward right now. It was around universal representation, including children. But I think we're going to wait and see what the new legislative session brings for us. There are a host of different issues that I think we need to take the time to look at more closely and develop state level and city level legislation. What we have seen, or at least in my experience, at the federal level, things move very slowly or don't move at all. But those same federal issues, immigration issues, with creative solutions at the city level and at the state level from a legislative or a budgetary perspective, can actually transform lives. So I'm looking forward to 2023 to work with our cohorts at iCare and other organizations that are in this immigration space to identify those solutions.
So we are at almost 20 to the hour, and I know I wanted to, what I do is say call to action. I'm so glad that so many people are here listening to us, but I always think if I were in the audience, I'd want to know how to get involved. So let me throw out a few ideas, and then maybe you could say other ways that you would like to have get people involved. Number one, we do have a lovely board. I don't think we mentioned this before, but we also have term limits. We put that in so that the organization will continuously be evergreen and growing and newing. So if someone is listening to this webinar and is thinking, I would like to make a significant contribution to safe passage of my time and my energy, help raise money, help be part of the leadership, I think we'd love to hear from you. There is a process where people are talked to, interviewed. I'm on the governance committee, and I know we will be having 3 to 4 openings for the next several years. So if you know someone, you, my audience, that you think would be a great board member, I know Angela and I, this is our personal preferences. We would love to also find people who are of the community. So someone who has maybe been an immigrant themselves or navigated these rocky shores, or is particularly empathetic, because while board members need to have many different skills, that's one thing. Another, she's put her email in the chat.
I'm not sure if the audience can see it, but I put my email there in case anyone is interested in learning more about serving, being considered to serve on the board. You can email me.
We are going to have a conference to celebrate our 10th anniversary in the fall, but our next big conference is February 10th and 11th, and the law school partners with Safe Passage and with the Federal Bar Association, and now with a coalition group called Immigrant Arc, which is nonprofit orgs, to put on an annual asylum law conference. And we're all actively in the planning stage this year. Sorry, my dog is barking a little. This year it will be February 10th and 11th, and it will be a hybrid. So if you are an attorney looking for CLE credits, you could register for that. We'll have the registration up soon. We will mail it out to the Safe Passage Project list. But also, if you're not an attorney and you would like to Zoom in, there will be that option. And we have some great speakers lined up. And we also will be showing a documentary film about some women lawyers who tried to meet the need at the Southwest border. Another way people can get involved, besides maybe joining our conferences, spreading the word about them, coming to those programs, is we will be likely, we don't know exactly when, again, pandemic controls and logistics, volunteering again in some capacity at the immigration court itself. So while we've been able to do our work very robustly in a remote capacity, the court has been asking Safe Passage and other children-based organizations to please try to find a way to meet the unrepresented children at the court to help them navigate that first hearing. So in the past, when Safe Passage started, there were non-lawyers that also helped in that capacity. They might just be greeting young people in the hall, directing them to where the waiting room would be, where a screening room would be. As we get that up and rolling, I'm sure if there's a way for non-lawyers to be involved, we'll let you know. But it is something that will take bodies and time to go to physical locations. What are some other ways that you maybe have thought about where the people listening to us right now might be engaged?
Sure. One of the things that we do as part of our screenings, actually, they're all remote right now. Before the pandemic, they were in person, and the screening involves in one day, 40 to 50 youth that are screened by an attorney. And usually we need a Spanish-speaking translator. These are typically volunteer attorneys that do the screening, not the representation. And the screening is simply identifying the facts of their circumstances so that we then can determine if they should receive representation from us or not. So in that screening process, we normally have pro bono attorneys supervised, of course, by our attorneys. But we need Spanish speakers, Spanish and English speakers that can translate. You don't have to be an attorney. So we do those screenings 4 times a month. And they are done on Zoom, and we conduct them in breakout rooms. It's very, very well organized. So that's another way that you can volunteer. But I think what would be incredibly helpful is if you are excited by what you hear, and if you know of other people or other institutions that need to learn about what we're doing because they would also be supportive, we would be very interested in meeting them, whether they be individuals or other foundations, because part of the challenge of being a smaller organization, I mean, the great thing about being a small organization is that you're nimble and that you can really, really provide that personal touch to the clients. But the other part is, how do we amplify our work? And how do we ensure that other people that are making decisions about how to strengthen the immigration legal services space know about what we're doing? So that would be a wonderful way to help us as well.
Yeah, you and I were talking about, it's very much our philosophy. Like, I have to say, maybe because I went to law school so long ago, when I first envisioned being a lawyer, it was just, I'm going to navigate the legal problems for you. But your problems in high school, your problems with your parents, your problems with learning English, your problems with finding a part-time job, that's not my job. I was always empathetic and I would try to resolve things. We are much more holistic. And I know some of our recent funders, that's one of the things that really drew them to support Safe Passage, is this desire that we have to try to integrate the young person structurally in the education, social work, legal capacity, community building. And so when people are listening to us and thinking, well, I don't know of anyone who does immigration law, don't think of it that way. Think of it people who do child development, educational achievement, job and career training, navigating the stress and emotion of families that are sometimes reunified, which is one of the questions we had in the chat. You know, why do so many children come to New York? Well, first of all, children have always come to New York. The first woman who got off the boat to Ellis Island, Annie, was from Ireland, and she was an unaccompanied child. And she was joining relatives that were already here. My own grandmother came in 1907 as a fake child of someone else that was discovered at Ellis Island. I only learned this in 2013. My grandmother never told me the story because Congress had banned unaccompanied children coming in 1906. So this is a perennial problem. But it is true that one of the reasons so many young people come to New York is because they have relatives here. So the majority of our clients are not everyone, but the majority are living with a close relative. It could be mom or dad who came many years before, grandmother, older brother, older sister, auntie, cousin, best friend of mom from middle school. And the danger in their country of origin is so extreme that parents decided it's safer for their child to go and rejoin these other family members. It's not just economic. Economic may be part of it, but it's much more schools being closed because of violence, insecurity in the streets. And as children get to a certain age, they become the targets, the direct targets of sexualized violence and commercialized criminal syndicates. So we need to understand how to do this better. And we also are very open to learning from other organizations that serve youth. So I just want to empower our audience to reach out to you, reach out to me, if I'll direct them back to you, or I'll be helpful to build an army of people that are supporting these new arriving children.
And I just think it might be helpful to ground all of us in what the actual process is for a child that comes to the border. That's not anything that anyone would necessarily know unless you're an attorney that works in this space. But you leave your country. Your brother has been killed because he refused to be recruited by a gang, or he got recruited by a gang and then was killed, and now you're in danger because you're being recruited. You make this journey across half a continent, get to the border, you get processed at the border, and you are placed in detention But the law says that a child cannot be detained for more than 72 hours. So within those 72 hours, they are processed by ORR, the Office of Refugee and Resettlement, and they look at the entire country to see where are there openings in a group home, where are there openings in a foster care situation, and then send them there while they have a hopefully guardian that could be a family member, like the best friend of the mom from middle school, living, let's say, in Queens. They then need to submit their fingerprints and show that they have an appropriate home for this child who is sitting in a group home to then be released to that guardian. At that point, they have a social worker that will go on the plane with them and fly to their guardian's home. Right. Then they have, or they will have already received a notice to appear, that now they have to go to court. And
this
so
is
that's
the crazy part. We treat them in this social work model, Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is not treating them as refugees nor resettling them, but at least it's a softer model. But then we throw them all into immigration court alone.
A building that, as mentioned before, you get into the building and there are no signs and you could literally be deported in absentia while you are stuck in the elevator because you don't know what floor you need to go to. It is at that point, once they are settled with the guardian or the family member, then they reach out to us. And then we start that screening process, and they learn about us through either their schools, community-based organizations, other family members that have gone through the process with us. And then we start that screening, match them up with attorneys, and represent them zealously and vigorously.
We also get referrals quite often from organizations within the city and in Long Island, school social workers, sports teams, league members, religious community members who know about our work. And so I think the audience should trust us that there's no shortage of youth that need our help, but we have to do it responsibly. And so that's why we're asking for you to continue to support us. So we should open it up, right? So Alex, did you want to come back on and moderate the questions?
Yes, please. So I've been answering a few questions by typing live, but we do have some more questions that I'm hoping you two can address. So one recurring question has been regarding social services. And so I'm hoping you two can discuss in a little bit more depth the type and scope of services that our social work team connects our clients to.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So we have a social work team of approximately 5 social workers. They all are MSWs. And the model that we have right now is we'll have an attorney that will have identified a need with their client. Let's say that they have a health insurance need. Then they will connect with the social worker, and the social worker then will take on that case as their own client while they continue to receive the legal representation, and the social worker will then help them sign up for health benefits, for example. Issues around housing. They will also connect them with whether it be the government agency or a nonprofit organization to help stabilize their housing. So the biggest issues that we've seen is health insurance, housing. Sometimes it's something as simple as needing some support for food. And it's then connecting them with the right place where they can get food. Thank God that in New York, we have a robust system that helps people that are food insecure. So we function more as a bridge and a connector to the organizations that can provide social stabilizing services.
There's another function of our social work team though too, and maybe Angela, this just was so mind-blowing to me. They make us better lawyers because social workers have a philosophy we don't learn in law school, which is to meet the client where they are, to not be judgmental. And it's hard sometimes. So many of our young clients, they want to rebuild family when they come here, and they may choose to marry at a young age or get in a sexual relationship. And so I think that our social workers are very good at educating our pro bono lawyers and our lawyers about being supportive and accompanying the young person. As well, our social work team has a big education function in the city because our amazing social work team has been able to be accredited to train social workers at Hunter, Columbia, NYU, and maybe even some other social work schools. So we are building capacity again in educating about the intersectionality of immigrant status and social work needs. And again, while immigrants are generally not eligible for many benefits, there are some rare exceptions. If you are receiving asylum, if you're in the asylum process, if you have DACA, if you're under a certain age, because we have a very generous state. So the complexity of that intersectionality of poverty law, social work and law, honestly, I've been in the field 35 years or more. I could not do it without the educated social work team. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Lenni.
And I,
oh, sorry, Angela, go ahead.
No, go ahead. And I see a question around innovation. I mean, I think Lenni really touched on it there. We also have done, sometimes we find complex litigation cases. And I know, Alex has been an incredible attorney taking complex cases that most lawyers would say, we're not touching this. And she comes up with a creative litigation strategy and wins the case. So I think that innovation piece is in pulling together and thinking creatively. How can we create essentially a care team for that child that we are representing?
Thank you. And I just want to note for people listening, we have a chat function, but we also have a Q&A button. So we have a few open questions, but if you click on the tab answered, you'll be able to see the questions that the answers that I've typed in, that I've tried to address, as this conversation has been ongoing. But thank you, Angela, for that answer. And if anybody else has questions, please do put them in the chat or in the Q&A function.
Right. One of the complex litigation cases reminding me was in my office. It was around 5:30, and Stephanie Gibbs, who had to leave the organization because of taking a job in DC, but she came to me with a child that we had already secured release, was in the middle of getting his status, and he was rearrested on a false allegation of being in a gang in front of his mother's home. They didn't tell him who they were, just two men in ordinary dress. They threw him in the back of a car. They put him in a cell. They flew him to California, and he was only able to make one phone call to his mother, and he said, "I don't know where I am." And Stephanie and I and other members of the Safe Passage team partnered with the Northern chapter of the ACLU. And ultimately that became a class action and a successful judicial challenge that said, you cannot treat these children as if they were adults. You must communicate with their legal guardian or parent. You cannot detain them without an opportunity for a release hearing. They call it a bond hearing, but children never have to post a bond. And it did take us months, but we were able to get this young man back to New York, where at least his mother could visit him in shelter care. We had to disprove the false allegations against him, and he was eventually released and reunited. But that took an enormous amount of effort of pro bono lawyers, of other organizations, of members of the staff. And yet I'm really proud of us for not looking the other way and just saying, well, we can't do anything about that.
And I think it's important to note that's really outside of the scope of what representing an immigration court means, but we would be, it would be a dereliction of our duty if we, just let that kid, sit in a jail cell in California. So, this is the kind of commitment and spirit that we also bring as attorneys to our clients. There's a question about whether we have a policy of helping paralegals become lawyers. So while we don't have a formal policy, we do have some paralegals. I know one specifically that is going to be taking their LSATs and apply to law school. So we absolutely encourage it. So I hope that answers your question. But
well, and one of our advantages is we are housed at the law school, and I always reach out to the paralegals and offer that they can audit my immigration classes without cost or charge, and having me around, I guess. If I can get anybody to go to law school, I want them to do it, including people of our audience. It's never too late. I have 3 pro bono lawyer friends that are in their 70s who went to law school in their late 50s, 60s. So come on, we live a long life now and we need the skills. So think about, if not coming to law school, getting retrained and volunteering. Anything else we have to answer? Because it's almost time. I don't want to hold people too long.
Okay.
Well, wait, it's almost the end of the year. Have people made their donations? Don't we want to say that? We didn't especially ask for money, but we always are happy to receive money.
And I mean, in repetition to what Lenni is saying, as you all know, the business model for a nonprofit is through generous donations from our supporters. It is actually something that is, all great things have been funded. The civil rights movement was funded by local small business owners. The greatest discoveries in science are funded through donations. And so if you are interested in walking arm in arm with us to support these children, please consider having your donation. If you do yearly donations, have a donation come to Safe Passage Project.
Great. Thank you, Angela, for sharing the time and letting me introduce you.
No, thank you so much. It was an honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Desiree. Thank you to the
everybody
audience
who participated. We'll be sending out a recording of this presentation in case you know of anybody who would like to view it but wasn't able to attend live. And if you have any questions, as always, feel free to reach out to me, to Angela, to Desiree. We are here to further the conversation. So thank you all very much.
And I want to give a special shout out to Alex and to Desiree for both being incredible leaders in our organization.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay well, everybody.
Bye-bye.